careful if you get cancer. I mean, you know, you could be next. I don't know either. Anyway, we're here tonight to talk about something more sensitive. Somebody in the front row will probably know where I'm going already. We're here to talk about why America should stop murdering babies. Abortion isn't the same sort of demonic practice that you would find at one of Hillary's spirit cooking sessions. What? Boo what? But it is no less evil. Before we talk about some of the serious issues about abortion, I'll talk to you briefly about my faith. People always ask you questions. There's a sort of, oh, but aren't you gay? How can you be a Catholic? And there are a couple of answers to that. Somebody once said, you know, if you think I'm bad now, imagine how much worse I'd be without God. And also, another of my favorites, you know, the Catholic Church, which is the best religion. We know it's a church for sinners. You know, this is, somebody else once said, my memory's going today. What's wrong with me today? Somebody once said that people become Catholics because they know they're sinners. They become Anglicans, you know, what most of you lot probably are, because they think they're righteous. There's some truth in there if you've ever met an evangelical preacher. You should always take what I say about religion with something of a grain of salt. I take the 7 deadly sins as more of a guide to life than a set of injunctions. In fact, I like to check them off every day if I can, with the exception, obviously, of gluttony. But I am a Catholic, and I do believe in God, even as I recognize that the church is a church for sinners, and I'm probably one of the most enthusiastic sinners of all. In the Bible, it says we should be fruitful and multiply. I don't think it mentions abortions anywhere, but this is especially critical. It's a especially critical subject at the time. Civilizationally speaking, we are being outbred, to put it in animal terms. There are existential threats to our way of life, growing everywhere in the world. Most obviously, and most threateningly, from the Middle East, from the Islamic world, where migration happens. Those families have many, many children, and in many cases, birth rates are dropping or evaporating in the West. And we aren't that very much far away from a situation like Japan. I mean, there may not be any Japanese people in 3 generations. They're just not having kids at all. And that seems to be, in terms of demographic trends, very much where we're headed in the West. Not that this is entirely simply a question of civilizational pragmatics, but it's worth considering that you can't win wars if you don't have anyone to fight them. Now, it's important to breed, especially if you have good genetics, which is why I'll finally be caving to public pressure and the millions of fan letters and auctioning off my sperm for charity. I'll be donating the proceeds to the Yiannopoulos Privilege Grant. Just don't come asking for alimony, because I'm not a citizen, you'll never get it. I once wrote we had a... wishing we had a religious right. Now, it's strange to you as Americans, and I would agree with you to a point, to be hankering after the religious right that did so much to mislead and to badger and to harangue and to bully people in the 90s. The religious right in the 90s were a problem. They were telling lies. They were saying video games could make you violent. Marilyn Manson could turn you into a school shooter. This was odious horseshit. It wasn't true. Just like when feminists say video games can turn you into a sexist. Bullshit. And the oppressors and the school marmish language policing kind of, you know, forces of darkness, the enemies of free speech, these days are progressives. These days are social justice warriors. But it wasn't that long ago when it was the religious right doing it. They've lost most of their influence now on American politics, and perhaps that's a good thing. Politicizing the faith has never worked out hugely well, particularly not in some of the Middle Eastern countries I mentioned earlier. But at least we can say that you have a religious right that sticks up for the rights of people of faith. And where they become weak, you see the sort of grotesque injustices that make me cringe, like gay people parading boxes from Memory's Pizza like they got it on the sly, trying to violate people's religious consciences. And I find that embarrassing and ugly. and humiliating, because I don't want everyone to think that gay people are all such preening cunts. It's my view that if you... Well, at least I do it in good suits. It's my view that if you have a religious conviction that prevents you from catering a gay wedding, you should be allowed to stand by that conviction. It's fairly appalling to see the media suck up to activist gays desperately trying to get attention, bullying perfectly good, ordinary, decent people. I went to visit the family that runs Memories Pizza, and they were about the nicest people I've ever met. They were lovely. And I felt bad for them. I felt that they'd been the victim of something very ugly and something very unfair. I'm not going to go on too long about religion, because I know that not all of you have the good fortune to be Christian, or even, if you're really lucky, Catholic. But there are a few important... Well, I want you to go to heaven. I do. I want you to go to heaven. I don't want you to be like the feminists. I want what's best for you. I'm pretty much, I'm just giving up for myself, but I can save some of you. When the rest of you get down to hell, I'll already be running the place. But I want to take as many of you up there as I can. There's only one sin that can never really be forgiven: voting Democrat. But I think most people know instinctively. I think they intuitively understand that abortion is wrong and that it is murder. And I think that goes some way to explaining why abortion advocates are also angry. It's like, you ever catch somebody in a lie and they get really mad at you, like really quickly, and you only realize later that they got really angry really fast because you caught them out. Well, there's something of that going on. There's something of that same sort of angry, empty fervor. And I think it has a name. I think that name is guilt. And we'll talk in a moment about what abortion does to the women, let alone what it does to the babies. When I say abortion is wrong, defenders leap to their feet and demanding to know why I want, for instance, this is a common catch they try to get you on. Why I want to jail a 10-year-old girl who has an abortion after someone rapes her. Well, guess what? I don't. And no defender of life, no pro-life advocate wants to jail that girl. Nobody does. It is an absurd straw man allegation, but people fall for it over and over and over again. I want to make a subtle distinction for you. And unlike feminists, my audiences are capable, are smart enough to enjoy the adventure known as reasoning with logic. And I make this distinction using the tools, by the way, of the Catholic Church, which has been reasoning gracefully since long before the first feminist had a hissy fit. Don't forget, by the way, the original feminists, Mary Wollstonecraft and Susan B. Anthony, denounced abortion too. Now, in principle, the Church teaches the direct, intentional taking of life is wrong. But that's a principle. And even in the most heartbreaking case, including the 10-year-old we're thinking about, it cannot be right to take the innocent life growing inside her, which has done nothing to deserve the death penalty. But as Western civilization has always understood, hard cases make bad law. You'll very often see, particularly in European countries, just desperate to ban anything. If it exists, there must be rules about it. It's like, this is how you can use it. I mean, every time I go back to Europe, there are more rules about everything. It's like, oh, no, you're using that pen wrong. What? No, honestly, this is the French influence. The French are a poison wherever they appear. The French are this sort of cancerous thing in the middle of Europe. Most of the worst kinds of philosophy, the stuff that enables, legitimizes, underpins social justice and progressivism, all fucking French philosophers. All this post-structuralist, deconstructionist, relative fucking bullshit. Derrida and Foucault. It's a load of fucking horse shit. All of the worst stuff that underpins all of the worst, craziest visions of the universe. All French. And they collaborated with the Nazis, just saying. The Catholic Church, at least, has long been an enemy of utopianism. And utopianism is the most prominent vice of leftists. They think we should all be perfect immediately. They don't allow for human frailty or imperfection. And if you're not perfect, they throw you out the club. We've seen this with feminists who don't toe the party line on transgender pronouns. In other words, feminists who aren't mental. Germaine Greer being the perfect example. They'll just cast you out of the club. I was cast out at birth, I think, from the gay club. I didn't have my gay card taken away. They never issued me with one because I've got the wrong politics. But this is how they are. Utopianism is a sort of leftist vice. They demand each of us must be perfect immediately according to their own warped vision of perfection. And it's a warped vision you'll find in gender studies classes and sort of Marxist gripe fests. Now here's the relevant distinction. I'm quoting from the Church's angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas. Human laws do not forbid all vices from which the virtuous abstain, but only the more grievous vices, from which it is possible for the majority to abstain. In other words, it's not wise to punish with human law everything that may be opposed to the natural one. That means that I can say it's okay to do something. I can say it's wrong to do something, and it must not necessarily be ruthlessly and rigorously applied in every case. I can say it's wrong to take an innocent life without having to say that we should outlaw abortions in every single case. And almost nobody, in fact, does believe that. In a sane country, we would argue about what cases should be illegal. Should you, for instance, as often happens in non-Christian countries, allow abortions when the parents simply don't want a girl? Happens in China. Happens in the Middle East all the time. Here's one more fact that will help you understand that St. Thomas Aquinas and the Church aren't the killjoy Puritans that your lying professors claim. St. Thomas and before him St. Augustine both followed the anti-utopian view that I've just described when it came to prostitution. They thought it was wrong to do, but foolish to make illegal. I don't think they'd approve of rent boys, so my 20s probably still requires some apologizing for. But it is... I was young when I needed the money. But it is still an amazingly progressive position, given what you would expect to read. Once again, dead white men, much clearer thinkers than your leading lights. Since I brought up Catholicism, I do have to mention Islam a little bit. Now, don't blame me. You blame George Lucas. He knew what he was doing. Don't try to tell me you didn't. Now, I do this partly because Islam is always wrong. Except for the female drivers thing. But I could pacify the liberals in attendance by saying it was mandated by the Diversity and Inclusion Department. No, we know abortion for sex selection has been common outside of Western civilization. The West is the best, and we have always been the best about everything, almost everything, almost all of the time. And we have never really suffered from sex-selective abortions. China's one-child policy. Many girls are aborted still today because the parents want a son. They need a son. They've only got one shot at it. So just keep trying till you get a boy. By 2001, there are 117 boys born for every 100 girls, leading the government to outlaw sex-selective abortions in 2010 and outlaw doctors telling parents what sex their child would be. But of course, the Chinese are sneaky and skillful, ignoring their authoritarian nanny state. They've come up with all kinds of ways around it. So these, rub some strange dragon semen or something. You can find out whether it explodes in flames or not if it's a boy or a girl. Another culture, just kidding, they're very nice people. Another culture, love the Chinese people. Another culture that values sons far more than daughters is Islam. I've said on numerous occasions, if you're curious what effect mass Islamic immigration to the United States would have, all you need to do is look at Europe. All the signs are there. Statistical analysis of births in England, where I'm from. England is a sort of modern cradle of civilization, undertaken in 2014, recently, proved that thousands of young girls are being aborted for sex selection purposes. Now, the government and others wave their hands and try to explain these things, but a brave Greek man has stood up to them. Not talking about myself. There are other brave Greek men. This one is called Christophoros Agnastonopoulos, a lecturer in statistics who has just taken my crown for the most ridiculous Greek name around. Christophoros dug into the numbers and found certain incontrovertible proofs. Gender imbalances may be contributed by multiple factors, but no set of factors can explain away the imbalances in immigrant communities in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. To quote him on the subject, the only readily available explanation is that consistent with a statistically significant gender shift of the sort observed in the census data is gender-selective abortion. Which sort of makes you wonder how these pro-Islam feminists at that ridiculous DC march, led by a woman in a hijab, there's women's liberation for you, explain away their Muslim pandering, Islam sucking off tendencies. When everywhere there is Islam, you will find oppression of women and gender-selective abortions. Thank you, madam. Under Islam, many girl babies simply never see the light of day, and if they do, it's in a tray, not in a crib. Feminists hate the truth, science, and logical thinking. Third-wave feminism is entirely rooted in lies, distortion, and hysteria. It is a system of conspiracy theories. The wage gap, campus rape culture, these things do not exist. But they are fed to the public to justify misandry. Feminist arguments are no different. The underpinning of legal abortion in the United States is the Supreme Court case of Roe v. Wade. Now, many argue that this is shoddy law, but I'm not a liar. I'm not a lawyer. Sorry, Freudian slip. They occupy the same place in my brain, those two words. Unlike pundits on both sides of the debate, I'm not going to argue the Supreme Court for your entertainment. But I will share some unpleasant facts that sometimes get overlooked in this debate. The Roe in the name of the case was actually a woman named Norma McCorvey. Norma McCorvey is now an anti-abortion activist. And in the first place, she never had an abortion. Roe v. Wade, the child in that case was given up for adoption. McCorvey now has 3 daughters of her own. She's admitted as part of turning against abortion that the entire case was a sham. In the case, she claimed to have been gang raped by thugs, which was a lie to make the case seem more sympathetic and get it to the Supreme Court. In fact, McCorvey claims that she had minimal involvement in the case beyond signing some papers. She was persuaded to play this part by feminist lawyers, by activist lawyers. McCorvey became an anti-abortion advocate after realizing the error of her ways. She bears a heavy heart. 50 million babies were illegally killed following the passage of Roe v. Wade. Now, how can feminism be both pro-women and not be pro-motherhood? This is one of the enduring mysteries of the modern American left. There's nothing more unique about being a woman. There's nothing you can imagine that you could celebrate more, that you could cherish more about being a woman than the gift of motherhood. So much so that invariably when you hear about those male-to-female people, I don't know what you're allowed to say now. They change it so often. I can imagine how you guys feel. I have to do this stuff for a living and I don't know what the fucking right words are. Transgender still okay. Right, well, we'll stick with cross-dresser, I think. Feminism loves abortion and loves to put down motherhood. It's a very strange kink, a quirk in feminist history. Consider that women's march in Washington. Besides a bunch of women leaving garbage and signs littered all over the city, because if there's one thing you can be sure of in a progressive protest is that they will absolutely trash the town. You know, the Tea Party used to have rallies and the fields were fucking spotless afterwards. Spotless! You see the pictures from the pro-life march that happened, which was smaller, but I mean the streets looked like they'd just been licked clean. They were cleaner when they left. Contrast that with the effluviant left on the streets from all those progressives, you know, sort of things leaching from every piercing. Madonna's bodily fluids. I just imagine her sort of wandering around leaking everywhere, you know? She's just one of those women you look at and she just looks like she's got stuff oozing out of everywhere, you know? She used to be so wonderful. Whatever happened to you? Anyway, Sue Ellen Browder, yet another abortion activist, who later became an anti-abortion activist, witnessed firsthand how the sexual liberation of the 60s and 70s inserted abortion into the women's rights movement. She eloquently points out that what the media can't see is the national debate over abortion is not a war against women, but it's actually a war between women. And as any of you who have ever come into contact with a woman will know, so computer scientists, I'm sorry, Try to remember what your mother was like before she threw you out. Women might be mean and spiteful and vindictive to you, but they're even worse to each other. They are absolutely awful to each other, and nowhere is this more apparent, more obvious than the feminist movement, where they literally tear chunks out of each other all day for a living. Motherhood and child-rearing somehow became anathema to liberated women, and abortion became a prime component of so-called women's rights. Now, one of the main reasons abortion became synonymous with women's rights is the adoption of abortion, pun intended, into the political platform of the National Organization for Women. But I'd like to share a quote first from Betty Friedan, who was the president of NOW at the time. In 2001, you're like, slightly autistic, lone clapping in the middle. Everybody else is quiet because everybody else gets those subtle body language cues from me about when they're supposed to applaud, except this person is... Sorry. Computer science strikes again. I'm sorry, Pumpkin. Ideologically, says Betty Friedan, I was never for abortion. Motherhood is a value to me, and even today, abortion is not. I believe passionately in 1967, as I do today, that women should have the right of chosen motherhood. For me, the matter of choice has never been primarily the choice of abortion, but that you can choose to be a mother. That's as important as any right written into the Constitution. Now, if she said that today to a room full of third-wave feminists, you know, after the hyperventilating had stopped, she'd be censored, kicked out, and possibly beaten up. Because feminists aren't pro-choice, they're pro-abortion, and in many cases, anti-woman. And you know, I find something interesting as a sort of... well, they call me a homophobic homosexual, which I'm not sure is entirely true. I don't like many other gays, but I do really like dick. So I don't know if I think they just mean I've got the wrong opinions for a gay.